with? Okay, mesh. Inshallah. Okay, we'll get started. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa barak ala Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Amma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We hope that everyone is doing well, inshallah ta'ala, today, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses you all with good health and good iman, inshallah ta'ala, and that Allah accepts from us our Ramadan bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. To proceed, inshallah, today I will actually be discussing a very important concept for us as Muslims, inshallah ta'ala. This concept is the concept of attachments and the baggage that we have basically in this life. Where are we getting this from? And what is its relationship with fasting? And obviously, I think in the title we have Prophet Ismail alayhi salam's name as well. So there are a few moving parts here, inshallah ta'ala, but if we take just a few moments, we will connect all of these concepts together. Number one, fasting. What does fasting accomplish? Obviously, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran that when fasting was established, He says, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, in order for you to have taqwa. So it's meant primarily to establish the sense of taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Additionally to this, there are a few verses that indicate that one of the most important, it's a very subtle point here, but one of the goals of fasting as well is liberation, meaning it gives us freedom. It liberates us from ourselves. This is obviously a part of taqwa. What do we mean by this? We mean that one of the lessons that we get in fasting is that the fast itself shows us how usually we are dependent on food. Usually, and not only food, but we're dependent on our desire for food. So it's not necessarily that we're dependent on food, it's that following of the desire of food that can actually be very detrimental, and it can dictate so much in a person's life. Nowadays we know, and this did not exist historically, is that people who eat all the time, and a person can indulge in these types of things, can overeat, carelessly eat junk food, etc., things that we know are inherently not healthy. These types of things are obviously not good for us. Historically though, that necessarily wasn't the case. However, following the desire for food could and did in fact lead people to try to gain income from an unlawful means in order for them to eat better than average food or to eat nicer food. Now, alhamdulillah, food is cheap, so much so that alhamdulillah, most of us can enjoy pretty much anything that we want at any given time. So we have the fitna of surplus. But the fitna historically was a fitna of not necessarily surplus, although alhamdulillah, the Muslim empire did have a lot of surplus. It was a fitna of that I want to indulge in that surplus. I don't have the means, and therefore I'm going to follow my desire by gaining my income through unlawful means. And this obviously still exists as well. So alhamdulillah, historically, both have existed, and we kind of struggle with both. Fasting, one of its goals is to try to teach us to not be as dependent on following these desires that people usually do. And this is why there's a difference between a Muslim in the sense of, do we follow do we there's a statement that says, do you live to eat or do you eat to live? So if the person eats to live, okay, you know what I mean, there's an argument for that. But there's people that live to eat, meaning their whole life, they enjoy food so much, it brings them comfort and all these things. And one of the wisdoms in fasting is that it's meant to liberate us from that idea that we shouldn't be following that desire that much. Although Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did create it in us, we are thankful for it. We are thankful that we can taste our food, enjoy it, all these types of things. But following that desire is obviously problematic. And the same thing with any type of desire, which fasting is trying to do. So it's trying to liberate ourselves from ourselves. Okay? Where do we also get this meaning from, the idea of liberation? Just so that before we talk about Prophet Ismail alayhi salam, there are multiple places in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sets the had, which is the religiously dictated kind of punishment or expiation of a certain sin. So for example, if a person does dhihar, where he tells his wife, you are like my mother to me, I'm not going to have relationships with you, blah, 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 all these things. That is haram in Islam. And a person, in order for him to expiate the dhihar, he has to first, tahrir raqaba, he has to free a slave. But if he cannot, then he has to fast 60 days, continuous. Okay? You have to free a slave or fast 60 days. Same thing with manslaughter. First thing, you have to free a slave. If you cannot, you have to fast for 60 days. If a person swears, a person takes an oath, first thing to expiate that, free a slave. If you cannot, you have to fast a certain amount of days, 3 days, right? But what's the relationship between freeing a slave and fasting? And the idea is very simple. Like we said, if we understand it as a liberation, you have to liberate a person, a slave. If you can liberate a slave. If you cannot afford it, or there aren't any slaves around anymore, then liberate yourself. That's basically the idea. If you cannot liberate a person, liberate yourself. And obviously we have to focus on liberating ourselves. Why are we in bondage? What are we in bondage from? Our own selves. We are our own selves' worst enemies. This is why these attachments that we develop sometimes hold us back. We develop attachments, by the way, of comfort, which can hold us back, especially now in these last 10 nights of Ramadan. Our comfort is our worst enemy, because if a person is just lounging around the couch, they're comfortable in bed, the last thing they want to do is stand up in prayer. I say, khalas, I'll just read a little bit of Quran right here where I'm comfortable. Why do I want to stand up and bother myself? Why do I want to push myself? So like I said, we are ourselves worst enemies. Comfort can be an enemy. Although I'm not saying that comfort is bad. In fact, these comforts are very good for us in a lot of different ways, if we know how to manage them correctly. And obviously the idea comes down to managing things, controlling them, not them controlling you. So don't let the comfort control you. You control the comfort. Don't let hunger control you. You control the hunger. That's the lesson. Don't let these desires, whether they're for food or they're sexual desires, or they're desires for fame, they're desires for gossiping, for propping oneself up, for arrogance, etc. All these things. We have to be in control of these, not the other way around. And the only way we can do that is by turning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by understanding that these acts of worship are not empty. They're actually meant as lessons for us. And obviously one of the lessons in fasting is that it helps us be in better control, and inshallah ta'ala we are the ones who are in charge, not the other way around. Once we understand this, and we understand that we no longer should have an attachment to food necessarily, we shouldn't have an attachment to these desires, we shouldn't have an attachment to the dunya, we shouldn't really, but we do, and this is part of our human weakness. I'm not saying of course this advice is for myself first. We're very weak in these regards, but we have to understand that liberating ourselves is to become a better version of ourselves. And this is the idea of growth, growing oneself, etc. So, with that said, what does it have to do with Prophet Ismail alayhi salam? One of the verses that we come upon in Surah Al-Safat is the story of how Ibrahim alayhi salam saw in his dream that he was sacrificing his own son. Right? And he tells this to his kid. And he says, وَإِذْ قَالَ إِبْرَاهِيمُ لِابْنِهِ, when Ibrahim told his son, إِنِّي أَرَى فِي الْمَنَامِ أَنِّي أَذْبَحُكَ فَانظُرْ مَاذَا تَرَى. He says, I see that in my dream, I'm slaughtering you, I'm sacrificing you. فَانظُرْ مَاذَا تَرَى. He says, see, what do you think? And this is out of the, subhanAllah, the good etiquette that Ibrahim had, alayhi salam, that he's still giving the option to his son. If his son said no and rejected, he could have used that as an argument. His son, however, knew that if he saw this in a dream, that means it's wahy, it's revelation. Now it's not tashri'ah, it's not necessarily legislation, it's revelation. There's a difference. Revelation here means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals things to the prophets of the future, but it's not necessarily like part of the religion, it's not a sharia. Because if it was sharia, then everybody would have to be slaughtering their sons, and obviously this is not the case. It was a test. Just فَانظُرُوا مَاذَا تَرَى. He says, قَالَ يَا أَبَتِ افْعَلْ مَا تُؤْمَرْ سَتَجِدُنِي إِنْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ مِنَ الصَّابِرِينَ. He says, oh my father, do what you have been commanded, you will find me among the patient. That's amazing. He's 13 years old and he's telling his father this. Now here's the thing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at the very end, He says, إِنَّ هَذَا لَهُوَ الْبَلَاءُ الْمُبِينَ. This is the clear test. This is one of the most severe tests that anybody has ever been put through. Wallah, this is one of the most severe tests. Because not only is it sacrificing his son, right? Obviously I'm not belittling this. Nobody would be able to do that. I know that for a fact, right? But the idea is, his son was also an attachment. So much so, imagine he spent a majority of his life making dua, Ya Rab, give me a son. And finally Allah answered it. And this is why the story actually begins that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him the good news of a son. بِغُلَامٍ حَلِيمٍ. And Halim means, forbearing, patient, etc. Which is one of the indications, obviously, that it's Ismail alayhi salam. Although, I will tell you this, to be academically honest, historically, that wasn't always the case. Now, it seems to be that there's unanimous agreement among all modern scholars that it is Ismail alayhi salam. However, historically, this was not the case. Many mufassirin, many people who did interpretation of the Quran, in fact, many Sahaba themselves said it was Ishaq, it was Isaac who was being slaughtered, and not, or who was being commanded to be slaughtered, and not Ismail, not Ishmael. Why was this? For various reasons. Number one, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not explicitly name him, clearly. Number two, many of those companions actually went and consulted the people of the book. They said, who is it? And the people of the book, without any doubt, they said, it's Ishaq, because that's what it says in their own books. So they just said, okay, based upon what these people said, it's Ishaq. However, some other scholars say, actually, if you look at it, and if you look at the details of the story, it's not that clear that it's Ishaq. And in fact, that doesn't make any sense. And if you look at the verses, for example, because after this, Allah then says, and then we gave him the good news of Ishaq. But if he's already talking about Ishaq, why is he giving the news of Ishaq again? Okay, so that's one indication. The fact that he called him Halim, that when explicitly he's talking about Ishaq, he says, he uses the word Alim and not Halim. There's a difference. Alim is knowledgeable, Halim is forbearing. And then when he talks about Ismail, and he said in another place, he refers to him as Halim. And then obviously one of the clearest things, and this actually shows that maybe the Bible itself obviously has it wrong, and there are actually biblical scholars who actually have said this as well, that the fact that he's commanded to slaughter his son, if he already has Ismail, because Ismail is older, everybody agrees upon this. Even, the people of the book, they agree that Ismail is the older son. Ismail being the older son, makes sense that the test is more severe if he's commanded to sacrifice his older and only son up until this point. Because if he's commanded to sacrifice Ishaq, it's still tough. But he has Ismail still. So he's thinking, okay, I still have somebody who can, carry on the message, etc. Because remember, one of the reasons that he wanted a son, it's not only just for the pleasure of having a son, right? Obviously, this from a dunya perspective is very beautiful. It's very nice to have a son, or to have children in general. But he didn't want just a child. He wanted someone to carry on the message of Islam, the message of the da'wah. He wanted somebody to carry his legacy on. That was actually his main concern. This is why he's a great prophet. And so his concern is now for the prophet, for all these types of things. If he already has Ismail, then it's not a problem. But if Ismail is the only one up until this point, because we know the age difference is there's a gap between them, and perhaps it is 13 or 14 years, then clearly, obviously, the test is much more severe. And this is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّ هَذَا لَهُوَ الْبَلَاءُ الْمُبِينُ. Indeed, this is the clear test, one of the most severe tests that anybody could be put through. But obviously, the essence of the test here, to not get into too much of the details, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not want Ibrahim alayhi salam to have a worldly attachment, larger than his attachment to him Azza wa Jal. And I'm saying this as a guilty person myself, that we already have a ton of attachments. I mean, think about how many attachments we have in this life. We're attached to our homes, our cars, our wealth, our jobs, our careers, our devices, our phones. I mean, think about how attached we are to this phone. If you try to take it out of somebody's hand, you might as well kill them. For a lot of people, So our attachments are very severe. And it's not the attachment. So I'll tell you, it's not the physical attachment, but it's the attachment of the heart. Meaning if I'm emotionally so tied to this, where I think that, for example, here's my phone. If I think that my emotional happiness is tied to this one thing, then that's very severe. That shouldn't be the case. That's why we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us. I can have an attachment in the sense that I need it to accomplish certain business. I need it to call people. I need it to do this and this and this. That's not a problem. But if I depend on this for my emotional happiness, this is a problem. My brothers and sisters, emotional dependencies are worse sometimes than physical dependencies. What do we mean by this? If I rely on something for my emotional happiness, then I need to reevaluate that relationship. That doesn't mean that some things won't make me happy. That's not a problem. But if it's a dependency, meaning I'm dependent on it, meaning I will be miserable unless I get it, then this is a problem. And some people have this with food, which is why fasting is so important. Some people have this, with water. Some people have this with their physical desires. Some people have this with their devices, with their phone, or their car, their wealth. whatever it may be. If I think that, when I have money in my bank account, I'm going to be happy. When I don't have money in my bank account, I'm going to be sad. Look, everybody agrees. Having a little bit more money, everybody will be happy or more happy. But can I be happy with less money as well? The answer should be yes. And if it's not, then we have to reevaluate, and maybe fasting can help us learn some of these valuable lessons, inshallah ta'ala. That my happiness isn't tied to these physical things. My happiness is tied to something larger, something bigger. It's tied to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's tied to His religion. That's the idea, inshallah ta'ala. If we can understand this, then inshallah ta'ala it'll help us understand kind of the relationship between, Ismail alayhi salam, how he passed the test. He was patient. He says to his father, "Satajiduni insha'Allahu min as-sabirin." فَلَمَّا أَسْلَمَ, they submitted to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Once they submitted to Allah, and he lowers his head down, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells him, قَدْ صَدَّقْتَ الرُّؤْيَا بِالْحَقِّ. You passed the test. You did what you were told to do. You know what I mean? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَفَدَيْنَاهُ بِذِبْحٍ عَظِيمٍ. We gave him the ram, he can slaughter that, etc. Such a beautiful test. Such a beautiful way to pass the test, that they both, submitted, they both realized maybe Ibrahim alayhi salam was attached to his son. Maybe he relied too much on his idea. Of course, this is not to put down Ibrahim alayhi salam at all, and I don't want anybody to misunderstand this and what we're trying to say. But basically the idea is, when we put too much of our emotional dependencies on these things, and it could be a child, okay? It could be a child, it could be a son, it could be a daughter, it could be a spouse. How many spouses out there have an emotional dependency on their spouse? Husbands have an emotional dependency on their wives, wives having an emotional dependency on their husbands, where they think that this is the source of my happiness. Without them, I'm miserable. To a certain degree, look, even the Prophet ﷺ, he had spouses and whatnot, He was sad when he lost Khadija, etc. I'm not saying that these cannot bring us happiness, but a dependency is where we rely on them first and foremost. And this is problematic for a lot of reasons, and it goes against the idea of being a Muslim. A Muslim elevates themselves above all of these to where my emotional dependency is on Allah alone. That's obviously a high degree that we should aspire to. And if we have, shortcomings and faults and whatnot, that's not a problem. We can work on them, inshallah ta'ala. And we hope that Allah gives us this Ramadan to work on them, and another Ramadan to work on them, and another Ramadan after that, and many Ramadans, inshallah ta'ala. And we can work on them outside of Ramadan. It doesn't have to be just Ramadan, right? Ramadan isn't the only time that we're good practicing Muslims and that we understand these concepts. But the idea, inshallah ta'ala, is to elevate ourselves and remove ourselves from these physical attachments. Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, Shaykh al-Islam, says an amazing thing. When they put him in jail, the jailers thought that, okay, khalas, he's going to be miserable. Anybody who's put into jail, khalas, their life is over. He was actually fine, he was smiling. They looked at him like, you're crazy. And he said, Jannati fi sadri. He says an amazing thing. And that, wallahi, this is one of the things that resonates with me all the time. My paradise is in my heart. Aynama ruhtu fahiya ma'i. Wherever I go, it's with me. My happiness is here. You can take me out of my home, you can put me in this small place, which is why I think it's ironic that a lot of these people now, like in the lockdown, right, with the pandemic and whatnot, a lot of the people that are protesting, who want to get out of their homes, are the same people who actually used to prep and used to be ready for the apocalypse. Unfortunately, they didn't get the apocalypse that they were looking for. Number one. So they're kind of disappointed because they wanted it to be, like this crazy, everything is going to collapse, and the only thing that matters is how many guns you have and how much bullets and how much food you have stored away, right? So they're disappointed from that point of view. Number one. Number two, a lot of them already have enough food to last them for a whole year. Many of them do. It's like, why are they upset? The idea is they don't understand the concept of freedom properly, and they don't understand the concept of, obviously being told to stay in is different than they have to stay in. They don't like to be told what to do. They don't like obedience to authority. That's a different problem. But the more crucial one is, what is freedom? This is really a serious issue. Like if I put a person in jail, are they no longer free? They're no longer free to travel, yes. But are they not free here, up in their mind? Of course they are. Are they not free here? Of course I am. In fact, my freedom here and here, nobody can ever take. This is the idea that Islam teaches us true freedom through fasting. Meaning, Freedom isn't what I eat or my choice to eat what I eat, because like a person might say, well, in jail, I don't get to choose what I eat. Okay, that's fine. You don't get that choice anymore. But have you elevated yourself over even the need for a choice or even the need to follow that desire? That's a very subtle idea that maybe we have to contemplate a little bit more. So this is why when they put Ibn Taymiyyah in the jail, he said, I'm fine. My Jannah is right here. My happiness is in here. It's in my heart. It has nothing to do with anything else. And he said, you know what I mean, taking me out of my land is tourism. You know, now, and putting me in a cell, this is khulwa. You know, I get to spend time with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just me and Him alone in worship. And all of us in this Ramadan, I think, have tasted this. And it's very sweet. Just being able to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, just you alone with Him azza wa jal. So these types of things. This is why Ibn Taymiyyah, he says, there is a Jannah, and inshallah ta'ala we'll end with this, not to take too much of your time. I know everybody's fasting. He says, in this life, في الدنيا جنة من لم يدخلها لم يدخل جنة الآخرة. He says there is a Jannah in this dunya. Whoever does not enter it will not enter the Jannah of the hereafter. Again, he says in this dunya there is a Jannah, there is a paradise, that if you do not enter this one, you will not enter the paradise of the hereafter. What is it? He says Jannatul Qalb. It's the paradise of the heart. Meaning your heart is a Jannah, it's a garden. It's a beautiful place. That's what we have to work on, inshallah ta'ala, in these few coming days, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, to make our hearts little pieces of garden, of paradise, inshallah ta'ala. Clean them up. Realize that our happiness is internal. It's nothing external. All these external things, wallahi, will not help us on the Day of Judgment, unless we invested them in a correct way. We use them for our good deeds. But ultimately, you know, even Ibrahim alayhi salam, he says this in a dua where he says, يَوْمَ لَا يَنْفَعُ مَالٌ وَلَا بَنُونَ إِلَّا مَنْ أَتَى اللَّهَ بِقَلْبٍ سَلِيمٍ. On the day, وَلَا تُخْزِنِي يَوْمَ يُبْعَثُونَ. Do not disgrace me on the day that everybody is going to be resurrected. On the day when no one, you know, nothing can benefit you, neither wealth or children. He realized this. He thought that his child maybe beforehand was going to help him or whatever, but he realized quickly, children won't help, wealth won't help. All these things that we're chasing in this life won't help us on the Day of Judgment. What will help us? إِلَّا مَنْ أَتَى اللَّهَ بِقَلْبٍ سَلِيمٍ. The only thing that will help is coming to Allah with a pure, healthy heart. That is it. If we have that healthy, pure heart, khalas, we've passed. That's what will give us success. That's what will give us Jannah. And if we have a healthy heart in this life, obviously we've already attained the Jannah of this life. It's not the same as the Jannah of the hereafter, but it's still a beautiful thing to have. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He helps us and guides us. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you all. Thank you guys for tuning in. Inshallah ta'ala, we look forward to seeing you again in a couple of days. Barakallahu fikum, jazakumullahu khairan, subhanakallahumma hamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.